I'm Dr. Ann Yetch, your co-chair for the Federation of Medical Women of Canada Women's Peace and Security Committee. I'm a pediatrician at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and a past president of the Federation. And today I am extremely thrilled to introduce our new WPS committee lead, medical learner from the University of Toronto, Ms. Zwetlana Rajesh. And welcome to the team, Svetlana. And a warm welcome to everyone joining us online for our fall 2024 Fireside Chat. Now, this video series is designed to introduce you not only to the women, peace, and security issues, but also to help you get to know some of the over 80 Women, Peace, and Security Network Canada members, both individuals and groups on a more personal level. So far, we've had the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Beth Warniak, the inaugural and now retired chair of WPS and the Network Canada, Ms. Zoe Dugal from CanDem, and Ms. Erin Hunt from Minds Action Canada. If you haven't had the chance to watch their videos yet, I encourage you to do so. WPS encompasses a very wide range of topics and issues, and we hope that through watching these fireside chat conversations, you'll feel inspired to engage with the WPS topics that most resonate with you. And a live Q&A is available for those who sign up to the talks and happens after the recordings are finished. So with that introduction, I'm delighted to announce that tonight's Fireside Chat will feature Federation member Dr. Karen Breeck. Many of you will already know Karen as my co-chair for the FMWC Women, Peace and Security Committee. However, tonight, she's here in her capacity as co-chair of another important WPSNC organization, the Women's Veterans Research and Engagement Network, also short form as WREN, WREN. Before we dive into that discussion, Svetlana, could you please lead us in our land acknowledgement for this meeting?
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody. I'm joining you today from Toronto. And for those that might be unaware, Toronto is a name that originates from the Mohawk word takaranto, meaning the place in the water where the trees are standing. For thousands of years, this has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, Toronto remains home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are truly grateful for the opportunity to work on this land and honor the enduring presence and contributions of Indigenous communities. Personally, as an immigrant, a settler, and a medical learner myself, I reflect on the complexity of our histories and the importance of acknowledging our shared responsibility in this journey towards reconciliation. I encourage everyone here today to consider the historical and ongoing impacts of colonization on Indigenous communities, including the disparities in healthcare access and outcomes, as well as the lasting effects of systemic racism. For those that are joining us or listening in from various locations, I invite you to reflect on the lands you occupy and the Indigenous communities that have cared for those lands for generations.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. And I'd also like to acknowledge that presently I am recording this from the lands of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations with the treaty that's covered by the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. So with that, I think we are going to need to pause and reflect because we need to consider what day it is today, and that is October the 7th. This marks a significant and very painful day for so many. It has been one full year of unimaginable suffering for so many in the Middle East. Joe Rodriguez, another longtime WPSN member, challenged us all today in her blog to walk together in making this world peaceful and safe. I personally can vividly remember October 7th of last year It is so very hard to believe that an entire year has passed since then. It is even harder to mentally and emotionally process the ongoing violence. It feels like a stain on all of our hands and our souls. No matter your view on these matters, one thing is clear, and that is we all want peace. We also know that peace is more likely to be lasting when women's voices are meaningfully included in the decision-making towards peace, especially in the actual peace talks themselves. This is where the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security comes in. This resolution forms the foundation of our work together today. In October 2025, just 1 year from now, will mark the 25th anniversary of this resolution, which calls for more women to be formally and meaningfully involved in peace efforts. This really does not feel like the right time for us to pause and reflect on how best to reinvigorate our own personal efforts around this matter. Women's really need to take up more space in public and political life. Women need to be more involved in demanding peace. Let's start planning now to best support, if not join, the UN meetings in New York next October for the 25th anniversary of the UNSCR 1325. It's also worth noting that 1 year from today, Canada will also be heading into a mandatory federal election, if one hasn't already happened sooner. This really is a perfect time for all of us to get more involved. Why can't we all come together and advocate for things like more funding and support for the WPS ambassador's office? Or even better, why not push for it to evolve into a full Department of Peace? There is so much more to say on these topics. However, I still have one more announcement to make before we get to our main event for today, and that is to provide some quick background context about the Federation of Medical Women of Canada, FMWC, to those listening that may not also be familiar with us. Our Fireside Chat series are designed to be open and accessible to anyone that wants to listen to them. If you already are an FMWC member, but not yet on the WPS committee, please consider joining our committee by mailing FMWC main at fmwc.ca. If you're a Canadian woman physician or medical learner, but not yet an FMWC member, we'd love to have you join us. Check us online at fmwc.ca. If you're a Canadian supporter of women's health and leadership, but not yourself a physician or medical learner, consider joining us as an associate member. And last but not least, if you are listening to this from outside of Canada, check out the Medical Women's International Association, also lettered as MWIA, at mwia.net, for links to groups in your country where you could get involved. Lastly, I'd like to also acknowledge that FMWC just wrapped up a very successful 100th anniversary AGM in Ottawa. We featured a WPS presentation by Senator Rebecca Patterson, the first nursing officer to achieve a general officer rank in the history of the Canadian Armed Forces. We hope to share her excellent speech soon on our website. As you can see, lots is happening at the FMWC these days. So thank you for your patience, and let's get on with the show. Svetlana, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. It really is indeed busy times for the FMWC. And really, like Anne mentioned, important times for more of us to be working in areas like women, peace, and security. And with that, it really is a pleasure for me today to be able to interview Dr. Karen Breeck, who keeps insisting I call her Karen. And so Karen, as many of you already know, is a founding member of FMWC's WPS committee. I'm so looking forward to learning a bit more about her as an individual, how women, peace, and security crossed her life path, and what the Women's Veterans Research and Engagement Network, or WREN, does. But before I start off with my series of questions that'll hopefully allow me and the audience to get to know her better, I also just want to acknowledge that both Anne and Karen received the King's Coronation Medals on September 27th from the FMWC. So huge congratulations on that honor. And now moving on to the questions. Karen, can you start off by telling us a little bit about you and your professional background?
Sure. First, I just wanted to echo Anne's warm welcome to you for becoming the student lead for the Federation's Women, Peace and Security Committee. I know both myself and Anne are very excited to be working with you in the days ahead. Thank you both for your thoughtful land acknowledgements. And I would like also to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from Ottawa, the unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Although I live in Ottawa right now, I'm not from Ottawa. I was born and raised in Calgary. Go Flames, go. I did my undergrad degree in animal behavior, focusing on whales at Memorial University of Newfoundland. I fell in love out there and I stayed on there to do my medical school. I joined the Military Medical Officer Training Program, or MOTP program, in 1987. In my medical school class, we were only 56, of which, if my memory serves me correctly, only 18 of us were women, and out of that 18, 6 of us were named Karen. I was lucky enough to see 2 of my classmates last weekend at the recent Federation's 100th anniversary conference. So a shout out to Karen Forgy and also to Tara Tucker. After medical school, I had the pleasure of being the oldest last person to go through rotating internships when they were still an option. And I had the pleasure of doing mine at a Toronto-based intern-only hospital called York Finch. I went on to do 20 years of uniformed service that included postings to Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Texas, Germany. All in all, I worked as a physician in every province of Canada and over 20 different countries. My military career highlights included becoming an aerospace medicine specialist and a peacekeeper. I supported the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, or UNDOF, in the Golan Heights, an area also referred to as Israeli-occupied Syria. I released from the military in 2009 and started to do advocacy work centered mostly around supporting women veterans and ensuring their health around 2015.
Wow, that is quite the journey, and I'm sure you have lots of great stories from all those experiences. And that brings me to our next question. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you first, as an individual, became involved with Women, Peace and Security and the WPS network here in Canada?
Thank you. It may surprise people, but although I'd already served in the military, including as a UN peacekeeper, I really don't think I was consciously aware of the UN's Women, Peace and Security resolution until around 2016. My memory of my introduction to Women, Peace and Security and the Women, Peace and Security Network came during one of my earliest experiences when I started to get involved with government advocacy. I was asked, very last minute, due to having a peacekeeping background, if I could attend a military roundtable. The focus of that roundtable was to be reviewing the upcoming defense policy update that at that time was called Strong, Secure, and Engaged. And they wanted to do a roundtable to look at the defense policy through a gender-based analyst lens. And at that time, GBA was a relatively new concept being applied across the government departments. I'll always be grateful because I accepted the opportunity right away, in part because Dr. May Cohen, a well-known member of the Federation, had introduced many of us to concepts called gender mainstreaming in medicine already in the early 1990s. To the best of my knowledge, gender mainstreaming helped pave the way for Health Canada's sex and gender-based analysis framework and which later is a broader and across all public service, is gender-based analysis. If you are unfamiliar with that term of GBA, there's actually a free online course available that anyone can take by just Googling GBA online course. In short, what is GBA? It's a radical idea that different people may experience things differently. So government policies maybe should take that diverse perspective into account when they're making decisions. That roundtable had some very interesting participants, including the then newly named General John Vance, who had just taken over as the Chief of Defense Staff and specifically was lead in addressing sexual misconduct in the military. Many of the other women veterans at the room with me had operational and peacekeeping experience, while the rest of the people in the room were mostly civilian advocates and academics. I still vividly remember that meeting because it was a shock to me to hear the civilian women basically discussing us, even though we were in the room there. They were discussing what they thought was our lived experience as women military members without actually acknowledging that many of us were actually in the room and perfectly able of speaking of our own experiences ourselves. When the military women in the room actually challenged these academic perspectives, one civilian woman in the room kept saying, "That's right, they should speak for themselves," and tried to give us space to actually be heard. And I kept thinking, who is this one lady who's involved with this? She's inclusive, she's respectful, she's allowing us a voice at the table. Well, that was the day that I met Beth Warniak. So at the time, she had just started chairing a network of individuals and groups that had come together to unite for a common goal to hold Canada accountable for implementing its National Action Plan, which is Canada's a signatory of for the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on the women, peace, and security. This whole concept of women, peace, and security working together in a network really resonated with me right away. After all, I'm a woman. I want peace. And I know that achieving peace requires serious focus also on security. So this whole idea of women, peace, and security was fascinating to me, and I have been an individual member of the Women, Peace, and Security Network ever since that meeting. That group of people and organizations was unlike anything else I'd ever experienced. It was positive, it was collaborative, it was non-competitive, and it felt truly supportive. They made space for all voices, right? In the full spectrum of possible voices on these tough, complex topic areas, including making a space for even a voice like mine as a military veteran. I was always made to feel welcome and part of that team. That network has grown over the years, but I really encourage you, if you haven't already, to hear Beth's story. She was our first Fireside chat. She really is, to me, an example of a wise woman who gives me, and hopefully many of us, our foundational knowledge about women, peace, and security issues.
You know, it's so amazing to hear about how you became involved with women, peace, and security. And I must say, as someone who watched Beth's Fireside Chat, it was indeed an inspiring and thought-provoking one. So thank you for that recommendation. And I've also taken that GBA course that you talked about and would definitely highly recommend. So Karen, my next question is, when did things move for you from being an individual WPSN member to an organizational member with WREN?
As I mentioned, I technically kind of joined as an individual to the network around 2016 when it was still quite an informal group of people. Since that time, it's become a much more structured organization. It has formal volunteer steering committees. We have the pleasure of paid staff. Shout out to Monique. And we, of course, with that, now have annual dues for our memberships. So technically, despite all these changes in the network, I have never transitioned out from being an individual member. Because I wear different hats for different reasons and different organizations, I have always kept my individual membership. I have simply added an organizational membership from both WREN and the Federation. So in practice, when we come to votes, which we don't do too often, I get 3 votes. One for me as an individual, one for me representing WREN, and one for being a co-chair for the Federation's committee as well. That kind of a setup works really well for me because it also allows me the freedom to speak on various topics that I'm passionate about. If there's ever a topic where my personal views maybe are different than that of the federations or WREN, I can still express myself independently in these forums as long as I'm making it clear that I'm speaking as an individual member. For those that are Federation members listening, you're already members of the Women, Peace, and Security Network through the Federation's organizational membership. So there is no extra cost for you to already be getting involved with everything that the network does. But just keep in mind, you would be participating as a representative of the Federation. So it's important to align your voice and activities with the Federation's values, missions, and processes. If you prefer more personal flexibility, you can still join the Women, Peace, and Security Network, just do it as an individual member. As for the history of the Federation and its involvement coming into the network, I will leave that for another time. Perhaps my co-chair Anne can dive into that storyline at a future fireside chat. So for now, maybe we'll focus back to WREN.
Yes, absolutely. We would love to have Anne for a future fireside chat. Like you said, bringing it to WREN, how has your lived experiences influenced really the creation and the mission of WREN?
Thank you. I've always personally had a deep interest in women's health. I credit the Federation's Dr. Meg Hohen once again for opening my eyes very early in my medical career to all the biases in medical research and medical training that all too often, even today, assume that our patients are male or male equivalents. Once you become aware of these biases in our medical system, it's hard to unsee them. You realize how deeply embedded these biases are in almost everything we've been taught in medical school. For too long, Western medicine has almost assumed that children are just small adults and women are just small men, which simply isn't in the proper case in many of these medical issues. As soon as you start looking into biological differences caused by X chromosomes, hormones, life stages, menarche, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, you begin to understand why researching anything to do with women's health is actually really complicated. Studying men is often clearly a lot easier. Women's bodies, with their variations in contraception uses, menstrual cycles, the potential of getting pregnant in the middle of the research, makes us complicated. But it was books like Thinking Critically About Research on Sex and Gender by Kaplan that helped me realize the importance of questioning all my assumptions, and especially when I was in the military and started to look at military research, which very much, still even today, may presume incorrectly that all soldiers are male. I'm still amazed by how many in medicine today don't actually fully grasp the importances of sex differences when we're doing our research. So this passion for women's health made my affiliation with the Federation a natural fit. But as I spent more and more time in the military, I became more increasingly aware of the very significant gaps in research on how to best prevent injuries and illnesses in military women, especially those in operational roles. While women have only been allowed in the frontline military jobs, things like infantry and sailors and aircrew since 1989, that is now 35 years ago, and yet we still lack crucial, basic, foundational research on female-specific occupational and environmental hazard impacts. The Government of Canada still does not have the necessary knowledge to optimize female soldiers' effectiveness in the workplace or to effectively prevent their sex-specific injuries and illnesses in the military workspaces. So, as a physician who's treated these incredible women and men, but a lot of my practice has been more women coming to see me. Uh, and it's been those women's injuries that I've seen over the last 20 years that it makes it so hard to not be a passionate advocate on behalf of that patient population. I have just witnessed too many preventable injuries and illnesses, including from, but not limited to, sexual violence in the workplace that have cut too many women's promising military careers short. To make matters worse, many of these women face difficulties then accessing equitable benefits, programs, supports, and care compared to their male veterans when they get out and are released. This includes any kind of injuries and illnesses that are related to our sex and reproductive health, our pelvic floors, gender-specific mental health issues, and sex-specific cancers. At first, I tried to advocate for these type of issues on my own, both within and outside of the Federation. It's been a challenge to get the civilian medical world interested in military and veteran women's health. I remember presenting to our military ombuds office on the research gaps regarding the safe employment of military women in operational settings. And I remember their initial response was something along the lines of, this sounds serious, but no one's ever identified this as a research gap to us before. Are you sure you're just not looking in the right research areas? Because surely all this research has been done. Because I knew I had to go find a respected academic to be able to say, nope, she has looked at everywhere and we don't have enough research. That is what led me to meet someone who is now a co-chair of WREN with me, Dr. Maya Ekler. She runs the Center for Social Innovation and Community Engagement of Military Affairs at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax. And she was able to come forward and confirm, no, there really is no research in a lot of these areas. So once that was established, funny enough, when we presented again, we were still with another question. And that question I will always remember. It was, are you just working alone or are you part of a group? Because, generally we don't take recommendations unless it's from a group. And by chance, that day, also at my meeting, was Ms. Sayward Montague, the Director of Advocacy of the National Association of Federal Retirees. That group, if you're not familiar with them, has over 170,000 members, of which over 18,000 are military or RCMP serving or veterans and their family. And they offered to partner. So together, the three of us are co-chairs now for WREN. We nicknamed it Women Veterans Research and Engagement Network, nicknamed it WREN, all in capital letters, so as to not infringe on the similar sounding acronym of WRENS, WRNS, which stood for the Women's Royal Navy Service in World War I and World War II. So it is spelled differently, but hopefully they would all be happy with what we're doing. You might notice just as well for that acronym, it has all of the letters except for the V. And again, that was quite consciously done because we were acknowledging that for women veterans, it is often still that we feel invisible, and hence our V in our acronym is also invisible.
Yeah, certainly such an important initiative. And I want to say thank you for leading this and finding that gap and doing this work. And you touched on this briefly there, but what specific gaps did you see in research or support for women veterans that WREN really seeks to address?
WREN's decided to stay strategic level. Our mission statement is that we're actually trying to ensure equitable lifetime health outcomes for all veterans, both the women and the men. And we use as measurements our 7 domains of well-being, which is defined by the Government of Canada. We're just hoping that all of the veterans can have an optimized health and wellness in their lives as veterans. But in order to help achieve that, in order to help identify where the gaps are or what populations or subpopulations are falling behind, one of the areas that we need to focus on is having data. And to have data in our world of military and veterans, we need the data to be sex disaggregated. So we support and promote the use of sex and gender informed and disaggregated data collection, reporting, and use that for all evidence-based policies and practices that are impacting on military or veteran members. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's often more health differences within each sex than between the sexes. So often what we find is often the military women are okay using the male standards or the male research to be applied for them. I'll say in my lived experience, I don't have stats, in my lived experience, about 60% of the time, taking the male only data and just applying it directly to the women, it works. There's some people it doesn't work for, but on both ends, the men and the women. I'd say it's about another 20% of the time that it clearly does not work for women, but it just needs a little tweak. And with a little tweak, it's okay. What WREN has been focusing on for the most part is what I call that last 20%. Because everything is compared to the male standards that were already in place, there is no standards for anything that is female sex specific. So there is no male equivalent research, policies, standards, benefits for areas that might be unique to women. Maybe things like breast cancer, uterine prolapses, urinary incontinence, menstrual dysfunctions, pregnancy complications, postpartum complications, menopause-related issues. This is that whole area of sex-specific health that we've been trying to gather more data and gather more research to be addressing. All of these things can have impacts on how to more safely employ women in these different life cycle areas with these different medical issues. Maybe what is the best medications, diagnosis, supports, and then also looking at care and benefit when these are injuries for them. The fact is, being an operational military woman makes occupational health research complex. For men, we study men and we apply the findings to the men. For women, even when we're studying women, we have to look at all of our various life cycles. We need to look at post-adolescence, pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding, perimenopausal, postmenopausal. It literally is at least 6 different researches that might be required in order to effectively be able to help and support a military woman throughout her career when she goes through all these different life cycle stages and yet is still being exposed to unusual environmental and occupational hazards. So each life cycle may need its own research to ensure the evidence-based answers for military women's safe employment. Everything from their uniforms to what their calorie intake, to what their fitness programs, to what medications and vaccines are safe, everything can vary depending on these different life cycles. So in 2022, Dr. Maya Eckler conducted a baseline study to help identify everything that was still missing in military women and women veterans research. And the government has had that as a roadmap ever since. So we're still waiting for dedicated funding and the political will to make it happen. You can find her report by just searching Eichler and then the title, Advancing Canadian Research on Service Women and Women Veterans. It's also telling that the top recommendation from the first ever parliamentary study on the experience on women veterans that just was tabled this June also had as its #1 recommendation that we need to address the research gaps that are still here for military serving and women veterans. If you haven't read that report or watched any of the testimony that went on for 90 different witnesses over almost a 1-year time period, please Google. The acronym for the parliamentary committee is called ACVA, so ACVA Women Veterans, and it will bring up the information for you.
Yeah, I've added Aqua to the list of my things to look up after this interview, so I will be doing that after this. And certainly, REN is positioned to address some of these issues that you talked about. So I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on how REN has engaged with these issues through research and engagement.
Thank you. Since we started in 2019, we have been a nimble and flexible group that has had many different sort of stops and starts depending on what the needs were. We did initially start as a formal membership-based organization, and we modeled ourselves off of the Women, Peace, and Security Network, trying to find and encourage independent and different group representation voices that we could information share with and collaborate without competition. And initially it was working, I think, quite well. However, in around 2021, one of our major partners had to pull out, and then that was followed by a snap election, causing a lot more politics to be entering into our area. And we began to get much more complicated, especially with things like conflicts of interest in how and who was coming to the group and how they were sharing the information and what they were doing with it. So since that time, we've kind of transitioned into a more flexible structure that forms as required in the manner required to best address the different issues or advocacy events that we identify as priorities. Overall, our strategy is to stay at a strategic level, apolitical as much as we can, and to specifically just be encouraging the proper implementation of gender-based analysis, sex and gender-based analysis, and Sager principles, sex and gender equity in research. At the end of the day, if those things were just happening in research, we would have the data to be the evidence-based and be much further along in being able to equitably care for all veterans. I think especially where almost all of our research, our supports and services are federal government funded, and our government says that they are following gender-based analysis, we're still with a bit of a gap in how it's being applied, and we can do better still. So we're advocating also for the importance of lived experience in the voices. We've seen this in the medical world where we get the patient voice to be much more part of the research programs and present at the conferences and part of the research team. We haven't been seeing that phenomenon as much within the health research in the defense world. So we've been advocating strongly for lived experience women, especially, to always be included in the research that is being done on them, to try and get them on the research ethics boards that are looking at women veteran specific research and trying to actually get them as part of the research team so that there's more accountability back to the community that's being studied by for the most part, civilian researchers. So we've been a big proponent of an idiom called "nothing about us without us," a term that's used by many different advocacy groups, but it's certainly also used in the military sexual trauma community, disability community, and with women veterans in general. So we think there's a lot more that could be done in this area, and that is something that Dr. Maya Eichler specifically has been helping and supporting, the importance of bringing participatory research into a more normalized part of defense and security research. As for the engagement part, I'll just do a quick shout out for the National Association of Federal Retirees. Again, they represent over 170,000 federal government members. So you can sign up if you're federal government and you're still in, you can still be a member. But to stay a member when you're out, you either have a pension, and if you're military, if you didn't have a military pension, but you were a medical release, you can still be a member. So, and it's for you and your family. So it represents over 18,000 veterans. So it is an organization that I have found to be very open to figure out anything they can do to help and support veterans have a better life in retirement. So give them a look if you are someone that potentially fits into that for military or RCMP.
Yeah, that is amazing. I hadn't heard about FSNA before, so certainly something new that I've learned today. And thank you, Karen, for telling us a little bit about the work that's already been done. And now looking ahead, what is some of the immediate future plans for REN and WPS?
think if I'm right now immediately, again, it is October 7th. I would be remiss to say that I'm not with bated breath for October 10th. October 10th is the last day that the federal government can table its response to whether or not it will be accepting all the recommendations that were made in our Invisible No More Experience of Canadian Women Veterans study that was done for the Standing Committee of Veterans Affairs. There was 42 recommendations that were made in that study, and whether or not government will accept them or support them or help implement them will be a formalized report that has to be made public sometime this week and no later than the 10th. So again, WREN looks forward to seeing what that response is and hopefully working with government to help them implement all those recommendations. There's also, I'll do a shout out, October 28th. It will be our second ever reception that Parliament Hill is doing a reception to honor women veterans. So we will be there and of course invite anyone else with affiliations to women veterans as well to look into that. And any day now, probably this week as well, we're waiting for the Minister of Veterans Affairs to announce the first ever cohort of a Women Veteran Council. So we expect at least 10 women serving and retired, military and our CMP to be named as a special advisory board for the minister. I have not applied, so I am not going to be one of those that are selected. I am hoping, however, whoever is selected, that we'll be able to work with them, and especially on things like women, peace, and security, work with them to work with the department on what they're doing in these areas.
Yeah, I don't know about the rest of the audience, but I was listening to that and thinking, wow, lots of exciting things to look forward to even this month. So that's very exciting. And sticking to the theme of future, what is your vision for the future of women veterans in Canada?
It's funny how time flies because now it makes me feel old to say this is a topic area that I now realize I've been involved with for over 35 years. Um, I can say legitimately that I'm seeing more positives and I'm seeing more things happening now in this last year and so than I have previously in my career. It makes me sad that a lot of the things that are happening now are still things we identified as problems already back in the late 1980s. It's taken a long time to be heard and actioned, but it is happening. So I do see a brighter future ahead for women veterans. It's just unfortunate it has taken an entire generation to start these meaningful changes in the right direction. The military is not for everyone, but it can be a very uniquely rewarding and challenging career for many. And for those women that do feel a call to serve their nation, I hope that they will be proud and able to stand on the shoulders of those women that came before them. And hopefully, we'll have provided them a more even playing field to come into the military so that they truly can be all that they can be within this environment. I envision a future where women, when they join, actually have equipment that is designed for them, and that they have medical supports and educational supports that actually support them and nurture them and normalize their different life stages, socially, medically, their chain of command, that it's okay to have menopause and still be in, it's okay to be pregnant and or breastfeeding and still be in, that these are just normal parts of having women in the workplace. Unfortunately, many women of the past generation did faced significant challenges and they did not get the opportunities that they deserved while they were in the military or also as a veteran. So the silver lining in all of this is I think we're good that we're gathering our lessons learned from that experience and that their pain and suffering from that generation will, I'm hoping, have successfully paved the way for a better future for the women behind us. So we do wish them well and hope that they will make us all proud in the next generation. I hope it's not too much longer for us to need to wait, though, for a military veteran joint research strategy. And I think one other thing I just noticed, we have appreciation days for almost everything and everyone, but not for women veterans. So who knows, maybe something like June 12th, which was the day that we tabled the first study on women veterans. Maybe that could be a day that in the future we could get in as a petition or support to be a Women's Appreciation Day or a Women's Awareness Day for veterans. Ironically, that day is also the same day as the US's Women Veteran Appreciation Day. So that synergy could be quite powerful.
Absolutely agree. I hope we get to see that day happen soon. Now, bringing the focus to our audience a little bit, many of our audience, but not all, would be Canadian women physicians or medical learners like myself. And so if they wanted to learn more about women, peace, and security or women's veterans and the research happening, what would you encourage them to do next?
We might be sounding like repetitive, but I think the fireside chats have all been really good and really helpful. So if you haven't watched our previous chats, watch them. If you're not already a Federation member, join the Federation. If you're not already a Women, Peace, and Security Committee member, join the committee. And if for some reason you're not wanting to, look at Women, Peace, and Security Network and join it as an individual. I will do a shout out to also put it on your list to educate yourself specifically about security and national security. I'm always a bit confused at how little most people know about the military or the military structure or who actually controls the military. Of course, in Canada, we are civilian oversighted. So the people who decide what our budget is, what our policies are, what our priorities are, what equipment is being bought or not bought are never, ever, ever the people in uniform. It's always, hopefully, the person that you voted for to become your member of parliament. So if you're not aware of that, it is the people you vote to be your representative in parliament that make all those decisions. So if you're ever unhappy about anything that's going on with the military, I really encourage you to get involved with, get somebody else then elected if you don't like the person you have. If you like the person you have, do you have a relationship with them? Talk to them and tell them what it is that you want them to be doing to represent your voice when they come to parliament. But it isn't the people in uniform that are making any of those decisions. It really is up to everyone listening here for what Canada's role for the military is.
Yeah, it's so important to hear that we all have a role to play in what our priorities are. We're getting close to the end of the interview, and so to close off, we have a little rapid fire section to hear a little bit more about your favorites. So first, do you have a favorite book that you recommend?
I will go with a book that Jackie O'Neill, the ambassador of Women, Peace, and Security, told us to read, and I found it kind of life-changing. It's not an easy read, but it's called The First Political Order: How Sex Shapes Governance and National Security Worldwide, and it's by Hudson. That would be for WPS. If someone was trying to learn about women veterans, I would suggest a book called Invisible Veterans by Kate Hendricks. It's American. Or Stories from the Front: Pain, Betrayal, and Resilience on Military Sexual Trauma. And it's by Colonel Furman, Firmin, again, American, but it gives a good context.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite podcast?
For Women, Peace, and Security, there's actually a new one that's just started up recently that specifically is on defense and security, and it's out of Queens. So if you just look up Defense Security Queens podcast, it will probably come up. For women veterans, there is one that you can find that's called Canadian Women Veterans Women Mentoring Network. So WMN, Canada's Women's Mentoring Network. So they actually have, I think we're up over 75 interviews, all for the most part with women veterans. and I was number 50. So you can actually go listen to me for another hour on that podcast.
Amazing. I do listen to that podcast and it's very, very amazing. So I recommend everybody to listen to that podcast. Any favorite websites?
If you haven't, there is huge amounts of information on the Women, Peace and Security Canada. There's lots of different resources, documents. It's worth exploring if you haven't already. If you're interested specifically in women's stuff, and if you weren't aware of it, it is unwomen.org. Lots of information specifically about women at the UN level. And of course, we're involved with the CNAP, Canadian National Action Plan, of how Canada is addressing WPS issues. So again, if you just Google CNAP, CNAP3, there's all kinds of websites that go into details, and I have the implementation plan of all of the 9 departments that are part of it. For women veterans, there is a grassroots website just of women trying to get together for the ACFA study of how we can make sure that it actually gets implemented. So you can browse around at what we're doing, and that is opacva, opacva.ca. Also, if you're not aware, there's a military magazine called Esprit de Corps. Anyone can sign up for free for the electronic version. And there is a column every month in it specifically about military women. So looking at espritdecorps.ca/military women to learn more about military women issues.
Great. We talked about some events already, but any particular events that you're looking forward to?
I think we have sort of mentioned all the big ones. I'll just do a shout out. Of course, we mentioned that the UN is going to have more celebrations than normal next year for the 25th anniversary, but that the UN is still meeting later this month, on including women, peace, and security issues. A lot of those meetings can be followed online as well. So it's just something to keep an eye on if it's an area of interest. And for those that are Federation members, we usually have people that go to these UN meetings. So if that's something appealing to you, start asking around and figure out what committees and what positions you need to be in, and maybe you'll be there next time yourself.
And any associations that you'd recommend joining?
Obviously the Federation, but whether or not you want to join the Federation, Women, Peace and Security Network, anyone can join that as well. And especially if you are ex-government or ex-military or RCMP or veteran, look at NAFR, NAFR, National Association of Federal Retirees.
All right. And last rapid fire here. Any favorite charities?
I think, again, if you go to the Women, Peace and Security Network, one of the pages is all their partners. Like, there's over 80 groups. Look through there, see what your passion project is, because it's something you can actually get involved with, and you can see where your money's going, and you can be part of those groups. So look at the groups that you can get involved with and stay involved with. However, I think personally, my heart is a little bit for anything to do with women and children for Afghanistan right now, and of course the Middle East, but also Congo, Sudan, Haiti. There's a lot of suffering in the world right now. And if you are specifically looking at anything for women veterans, the only charity I'm aware of specifically is there is a very kick-ass group of women veterans coming out of the Ukraine that are doing amazing work, and they have their own website and they are actively looking for funding and support. So if you Google Women Veterans Movement Ukraine, you can see what kind of stuff they're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of those recommendations. And with that, I fear our time has come to an end for the interview. Had we had more time, I'm sure we could have kept asking you a lot more questions. And I'm sure I speak for everyone listening to say thank you so much, Dr. Breeck, for participating today. I certainly learned a lot and even have a few new books and podcast recommendations to follow up on that I'm excited about. But for now, I'll hand the speaker role back to Anne for some closing thoughts and remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Svetlana, and I want to give a huge thank you to both you and to Karen. It has been a fascinating evening of finding out all about WREN, finding about your life involved in aerospace medicine, in the military, and in advocacy. What a huge journey you've had, Karen, and thank you for sharing that. I also want to take a moment to give a big shout out to the amazing WPSNC network coordinator, Monique Gugliere. And please come on camera for a moment so people can meet you. And we want to send you our thanks for your time, for your efforts in supporting this committee tonight, as you do always, because we really couldn't do this talk series without you. So thank you so, so much. You're an important reason, right? You're the backbone here of the WPSN. So you make it an effective group. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoy being able to help you out like this.
So as we come to a close, I'm hoping that we've met our listed learning objectives. We're a little bit wiser about FMWC, WPS, and WPSN / Canada. And we know more about women veterans, because I certainly have learned quite a lot from you, Karen. Really appreciate it. So what we're going to do now for you joining us live today, please stay put. We'll be moving shortly into our live Q&A session, but for those listening in on the recording, our time has sadly come to an end. So it's our wrap for the recording, and stay online those for the Q&A.